My name's Matthew Symonds. I'm the Development Manager for VOSCA, and I attended the Bristol Partnership Executive Board on the 8th of June, substituting for Wendy Stevenson. The first agenda item that was discussed was about substitutes for the Bristol Partnership. Up until now, only named people have been able to attend the Bristol Partnership, but the meeting agreed that they would allow substitutes who were named, but that those named substitutes would not have a vote as the main board members do. Deborah Evans reported from the governance group for the Bristol Partnership and gave some recommendations from that group on how statutory agencies should be represented on the partnership board. Up until now, there have been representatives from all of those agencies, the police, NHS Bristol, the council, etc. But some of them have only been there because they've been chairs of one or another of the sub-boards. The retirement of the current chair of the Safer Bristol Partnership Board has meant that there isn't a representative from the Avon Fire and Rescue. So one of the recommendations is that those agencies, if they're not already represented through another way, will be invited to send a representative to the Bristol Partnership. In March at the Bristol Partnership Executive Board meeting, there was a discussion around adult education providers, and there was an action from that meeting for Keith Elliott from the City of Bristol College to convene a meeting with adult education providers to identify what is currently being provided. Keith Elliott reported back at the June meeting that the first of two meetings have taken place, and the scope for their work is to identify what is already being provided and where there may be some duplication. And the group has agreed to work together in drawing up a strategy in light of the reduced funding that is likely to be available for adult education. Amongst the voluntary and community groups who've been involved in that discussion include people like the Prince's Trust, Circumedia and others. The 14 organisations took part in the first meeting. Keith Elliott reported this will run alongside the Skills and Competitive Board that is also happening, so they'll make sure that they complement each other and they don't duplicate the work around education. Marvin Rees, the director of the Bristol Partnership, reported on the budget for the Bristol Partnership for the next 3 years. Marvin said that the current funders, the council, the police and NHS Bristol, have committed to continue to fund the partnership on a shoestring for the next 3 years. However, there was some issues raised by Jan Ormondroyd, the Chief Executive, that given there is an emergency budget coming up on the 26th of June, that along with all other funding decisions may have to be reviewed in the light of funding cuts from central government. There were some brief updates from the theme boards. Ben Barker reported from the Thriving Neighbourhoods Board about the Pride of Place project, which is being launched to celebrate what's happening in the 14 neighbourhood partnerships. Bethan Evans from the Prosperous and Ambitious Board reported that they had been looking at issues around transport, digital connectivity, and they're just about to consider cultural strategy for Bristol. And Deborah Evans reported from the Children and Young People's Trust how the Children and Young People's Services had recently undergone an Ofsted inspection and had been given a good scoring from Ofsted for safeguarding of children and for the looked after children policies and practices they're doing. There was no representative from the Safer Bristol Board or the Health and Wellbeing Board at the meeting, so there were no updates from either of those. The main item for discussion at the Executive Board meeting was entitled Driving the Economic Recovery, and it was a report presented by Jan Ormondroyd, the Chief Executive of Bristol City Council, very much looking at the proposals around total place. Total place is a phrase that describes projects that have happened in various places where they've looked at the services that are being provided by the different agencies and considered where there is duplication and have also identified where there's unmet need. So the theory in principle is that if you avoid duplication through better partnership working, you can make them more cost effective, deliver it better to more people, and potentially release up funding to provide additional services that are not being met. Now that sounds great, and there was quite a lot of discussion around the report. Many of the people at the meeting were commenting on how partnership working has been underway for a long time, and that Total Place isn't actually very different from good partnership working. So is it just the emperor's new clothes, the latest buzzword? Total Place, although initiated by the last government, is something that the new coalition government are still interested in, especially where it can reduce public expenditure and maintain frontline services, as the phrase goes. The Total Family project was highlighted in the discussions around Total Place. That's a project that's underway in Bristol, mainly working with children and young people's services and with the housing department to try and see how you can break down the barriers to improve services to people in need, and to try and intervene earlier where there may be problems which, if they're left and not addressed, whatever they may be, they actually lead to increased costs on public services. Jan reported that a group of people from the west of England are going up to Westminster to lobby for Bristol and what it can offer, and to try and safeguard it against some of the cuts that might be coming. And Barbara Drank also highlighted how that the west of England has been joining up with Cardiff recently to lobby for improvements to the rail network. So there's clearly potential for joint lobbying, and the voluntary sector has a huge role to play in that, especially given the cuts that are coming to public services and the government expectation that there will be more delivered by the voluntary sector as well as the private sector. Total Family requires the different partners to go beyond what they would normally see as their remit in their job, but traditionally different agencies see their piece of work that they do and it ends at a certain point. And so one of the challenges that was raised there was how to get the different partners to acknowledge that sometimes they need to go beyond what is their remit, and there's issues around how that's funded, who picks that up, because the savings might be on another department, but actually the intervention is being picked up by somebody else initially. So Total Place, it's a great idea in principle, but in practice it's going to require a big shift in the way that public agencies work often, and work less in individual departments or in individual agencies, and much more sharing different workloads. There were 4 recommendations from the Total Place report, and the final recommendation was that a new what was described as an exemplar project be developed around the neighbourhood partnerships in Total Place. It's unclear at this stage what that will be, but that was passed to Di Robinson, the Service Director for Neighbourhoods, and Ben Barker, the Chair of the Thriving Neighbourhoods Board, to take that forward. And VOSCA have offered, as other voluntary sector groups will, I'm sure, to be part of developing that exemplar project around Total Place to help break down some of the barriers around improving delivery of services to neighbourhoods. The final item at the Executive Board meeting was an announcement that Marvin Rees, who is currently the Director of the Bristol Partnership, has secured a place on a Global Leaders programme at Harvard in the United States. So he'll be leaving the Bristol Partnership in August for 4 months,